Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 312. Half Human, Half Monster. Part 1. I'll talk. I'll say anything, so please stop. Gyeong Sao, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan, begged in shock as his arm was on the verge of being ripped off. Seeing him like this, the scarred middle-aged man, Li Guang, urged, "Elder." Gyeong Sao's current behavior was no different from yielding to the enemy. Unlike Gyeong Sao, who was brought in by the organization's invitation, Li Guang had been a member of the organization for a long time, so this was unacceptable to him. "We mustn't submit." At his shout, Gyeong Sao, holding his dislocated shoulder, cried out, "Would you say the same if it were your arm, not mine?" To a martial artist, not only the danjian but also the arms and legs are all precious. Losing even one of them would disrupt the balance and significantly lower one's martial prowess. That's why Gyeong Sao was trying to avoid his arm getting ripped off, even if it meant using his energy. "I haven't settled my match with Tang In-hei yet, nor have I reached the realm of the 10,000 poisons body. I can't afford to lose an arm." He had yet to fulfill his ambition of settling the match with Tang In-hei and reaching the end through poison. With many aspirations, Gyeong Sao had a strong attachment to himself, so he had no choice but to cherish himself over the organization. "I'll tell you everything I know, so please stop. If you had been this obedient from the start, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. I won't be arrogant." "So?" Gyeong Sao trailed off and looked at Mok Jaeongun's hand. He was pleading pathetically, as if begging him to let go. That old man, Gyeong Sao. Li Guang thought it wouldn't do. Given his age and outstanding experience, he thought Gyeong Sao wouldn't yield to the enemy. But since he wasn't originally a member of the organization and was invited, Li Guang didn't expect his self-attachment to be this strong. So Li Guang had to make an extreme choice. Explosive 3 swords. Li Guang used his sword fingers to perform a triangular thrust. Then, 3 strands of exploding sword energy extended from his sword fingers and rushed towards Mok Jaeongun. Swoosh swoosh swish. 2 strands of the rushing exploding sword energy aimed at Mok Jaeongun's head and heart. And the trajectory of the remaining strand was aimed at Gyeong Sao's head. "What?" Gyeong Sao's expression contorted as he turned his head towards the rushing sword energy. Was Li Guang really targeting his life to silence him? Although it was the right choice for Li Guang, it was absurd that he aimed for his life without any hesitation. Swish. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun reached out his hand towards the approaching strands of sword energy. Then, ripples formed in the void. It was the profound principle of the scripture of transferring true chi, deflecting the opponent's power. Clang clang bang. The exploding sword energy collided with the ripples and bent, deflecting in different directions. Crash crash boom. As a result, only the innocent surrounding buildings were destroyed. Mok Jaeongun, who had too easily blocked the exploding sword technique, looked at Li Guang and said, as expected, "It seems I need to put a hole in your belly before having a conversation with you." Damn it. Li Guang's complexion darkened rapidly. It was indeed impossible to face a supreme master who had reached the 6th heaven realm with pure individual strength. What the hell was that bastard? What did he do to become this absurdly strong in less than half a year? Had such a thing ever happened in the history of the martial world? It made all the years he had spent cultivating martial arts feel futile. Grip. Li Guang bit his lip hard and glanced at his sword lying on the ground. That black sword, looking as if it had been charred, was given to him by that person. Suddenly, the memory of when he bowed to that person for the first and last time resurfaced. A place shrouded in darkness. Except for where he was prostrating, there wasn't a single point of light, making it impossible to even see faces. A voice reached his ears. "The son of the deceased Li Seek, you say?" It was a sort of scratchy voice. But without minding it, he replied, "Yes, that's correct. Your father, who was merely in the 2nd realm, never bowed to me until the moment of his death." "I am aware of that." "Then why do you think I called for you?" "I don't know. Did you swear to inherit your father's mission and devote your life to me? Yes. Loyalty passed down through generations. Even though humans can't live for even 100 years, I like this aspect of him. Pardon? Enough. It was just a monologue. Stab. As soon as those words ended, something fell and stuck into the ground in front of Li Guang. It was a black sword that looked as if it had been charred. It was a sword with a crude shape, lacking even luster, but Li Guang was captivated by the strange energy emanating from it. What is this? It's a special gift for you. A special gift? Yes. Very special indeed. What do you think it's made of? I don't know. You said you learned swordsmanship from your father, but your insight is lower than I thought. Slightly provoked by those words, he answered, Is it made of black iron? It's not made of black iron, perennial steel, or anything like that. If it were, it would have been easy to refine. Then what is it? Didn't I tell you to guess? At those words, the young Li Guang hesitated before touching the blade with his hand. His father greatly valued the resonance with the sword. That's why he wanted to feel the sword directly and sense what was contained within it. As Li Guang touched the blade, slice. His hand was cut. Apart from the charred-looking tip, the blade itself looked crude, but unexpectedly, it was sharp enough to cut without even slicing. But the moment the blood touched the sword, tremble, tremble, tremble. The blade trembled violently as if it were alive. Along with it, a strange energy was felt through the part in contact with his palm. It was an immense ferocity. Roar. At that moment, Li Guang was startled, removed his palm from the sword, and even fell on his bottom. What the hell? What was that just now? It was too vivid to be called an illusion. He saw something roaring, but it wasn't a ferocious beast like a tiger or a bear. It was as if a dragon? As soon as those words left his mouth, the sound of clapping was heard. Clap, clap, clap. Along with it, that person's voice was heard. Not bad. I didn't have high expectations, but for a young brat like you to resonate with that remnant. What is this? Rejoice. You have obtained a black sword made from the scales of a spiritual beast close to a divine beast. Spiritual beast? Yes. It is the Dragon Demon King. Saying it like this might not resonate with you. Alright. It is made from the scales of a millennium-old Amugi. At those words, Li Guang's expression became half-believing, half-doubting. He had heard from his father that there were those who dealt with demons and spirits in the organization, but he didn't know it would be that person. But do Amugis actually exist? He had seen some demons and spirits, but weren't dragons creatures that only existed in legends and imagination? Seeing his puzzlement, that person said, Cherish it dearly. In your most desperate moment, it will become a great source of strength for you. The most desperate moment. Li Guang, who had been staring intently at the black sword, reached out his hand towards it. Then, the sword floated and flew towards him due to his true energy. Grab. Li Guang grabbed the hilt of the black sword and looked at Mok Jiangnan with slightly tense eyes. At this, Mok Jiangnan removed his hand from Guyang Sao's twisted wrist and pushed him aside. Kook. Then, walking towards him, he said, Fortunately. I was hoping you wouldn't just submit. No matter how much I offered you a chance to live, I wanted to pay back the debt appropriately. Indeed, my judgment back then was correct. What was? You are a bastard who must be killed. In less than half a year, the young brat who hadn't learned martial arts had appeared as a supreme master on par with the great sages. This bastard was too dangerous. More so than the sixth heaven, or even the prophecy that person was seeking. Mok Jiangnan chuckled and said, You should have killed me back then. Swish. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jiangnan's figure blurred and disappeared. Although Li Guang realized that he was moving at an extremely high speed, he didn't bother trying to locate Mok Jiangnan. Instead, he abruptly grasped the hilt of the black sword in reverse and then, stab. Suddenly, Mok Jiangan stopped in front of him. Then, as if unable to understand, he tilted his head and said, "What a dull conclusion. Are you trying to silence yourself through suicide?" Ugh. Li Guang let out a painful groan. He had made an unexpected, impulsive move. He had stabbed his own black sword into his heart and his chest. Anyone could see that this was an act of suicide. Mok Jiangan couldn't hide his disappointment at his extremity. He had intended to make him talk after making him feel an appropriate amount of pain. But who would have thought he would choose suicide instead of yielding to force and opening his mouth? Grab! Mok Jiangan grabbed the head of Li Guang, who was staggering and about to fall backward. Then he said, "But I can't let you die peacefully. I need to hear at least these two things from you, no matter what." Ugh. If you tell me just two things, I'll send you off comfortably. The demon sword, who is? Shudder. Suddenly, Mok Jiangan furrowed his brows. That was because Li Guang's eyes had turned white, becoming demon eyes. But the change didn't end there. Bulge. Bulge. Bumpy scales were already appearing on his neck and facial skin. They resembled the scales of a snake. What was this? This bizarre transformation? As he was puzzled, Li Guang's teeth became sharply pointed, and his energy also changed. This energy wasn't internal energy. His true energy was transforming into demonic energy. Could it be? Mok Jiangan glanced at the black sword stabbed into Li Guang's chest. With a hunch, Mok Jiangan grabbed the hilt of the sword. At that moment, a violent evil aura explosively surged up, strongly rejecting Mok Jiangan and pushing him away. Bang! Mok Jiangan's body, slightly lifted into the air, landed 8 steps away. Pushed back, Mok Jiangan looked at Li Guang with narrowed eyes. In the eyes of Mok Jiangan, who had opened his ghostly eyes, the demonic energy explosively increasing behind Li Guang was taking shape. Just how high level was this demonic energy that even its aura was taking form? Roar. Black horns protruding like a deer's, a fiery red dorsal fin. A giant body with scales extending like a snake. It was the legendary creature he had only seen in books, an Amugi. At that sight, the corners of Mok Jiangan's mouth twitched and rose. Well, you had a hidden trump card. Chapter 313. Half Human, Half Monster. Part 2. Roar. It wasn't visible only to Mok Jiangan's eyes. The energy was so prominently taking shape that even Chang Ryan, who was inside the wooden puppet, could see it. White demon eyes. Black horns protruding like a deer's, a fiery red dorsal fin fluttering as if it would burn. A giant body with scales extending like a snake. Emugi. Chang Ryan spoke as if it was absurd. At this, Mok Jiangan asked in puzzlement. Can you see it? I can see it. This is the first time the energy has been so prominently felt despite being inside here. Chang Ryan couldn't hide his astonishment. So Amujis actually exist. I have only heard about Amujis, but this is the first time seeing one. Among spiritual creatures, dragons can be considered the rarest. Indeed. But that is. It looks more like a remnant obsession rather than the Amugi itself. Yes. Mok Jiangan nodded in agreement. Although the energy itself was strong enough to take shape, it was a remnant obsession left in the demonic energy. How strong must one's will have been in life for the obsession to materialize to such an extent? Anyway, judging from the remnant obsession and the surging demonic energy, Li Guang's transformation seemed ominous. It doesn't seem like we should just leave him be. At Chang Ryan's opinion, Mok Jiangan smacked his lips. If I kill him right now, it'll be done. The ominous energy spreading out gave a sense of pressure and wariness, but now, while he was transforming, was the perfect timing to deal with him. If there was nothing, in particular, to ask, he would have immediately beheaded him. Right at that moment. The trembling has stopped. Li Guang, whose entire body was covered in scales, seemed to have completed the transformation as the trembling disappeared. The explosively surging demonic energy was also gradually stabilizing. One peculiar thing was that the black sword stabbed into his abdomen was sticking to him as if it had become one with his body. Then, someone's voice was heard. "What in the world is this?" It was Gyeong Sao, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan and the 8 Poison sect leader. He seemed perplexed by the sight of Li Guang, who had stabbed a sword into his own abdomen as if committing suicide, transforming into a half-demon form. Right at that moment. Swish! The transformed Li Guang, now half-human and half-monster, raised his head and glared at Gyeong Sao with eerie white eyes. Shudder! As his eyes met the white eyes without pupils, Gyeong Sao felt a strong sense of threat. No matter how he looked at it, that was not the Li Guang he knew. At that instant. Swish! Huh? The half-human, half-monster Li Guang disappeared from Gyeong Sao's sight. Instinctively certain that he was moving at an extremely high speed using lightness skill, Gyeong Sao urgently released the 8 Poison's toxic energy in all directions. Poison was like his limbs. If someone approached and came into contact with the spreading poison, he could immediately grasp their location. Swish! Someone had approached from the right, 3 steps away. As expected. Since his right arm was broken, he naturally guessed that the attacker would target his right side or back. So Gyeong Sao used his left hand to perform one of the absolute techniques of the toad poison art, the 9 formations benefiting formation. Although the power of the technique was reduced when performed with one hand, befitting his realm as a transformation expert and a poison master, he added swiftness to somehow make up for it. Swish 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 swish. The trajectory of the 9 formations benefiting formation palm strikes drawn by Gyeong Sao rushed towards the vital points on the upper body of the detected presence. However, that someone, Li Guang, who had become half-human and half-monster, lightly leaned his upper body back and avoided the trajectory of the palm strikes. Gyeong Sao couldn't help but be inwardly surprised that he easily dodged the technique by moving only his upper body. Strictly speaking, he had considered Li Guang's martial prowess to be similar to or slightly below his own. But what was going on? Unlike the bewildered Gyeong Sao, Li Guang's white eyes were filled with ecstasy. Gyeong Sao's absolute technique, which had surpassed the wall, felt slow to him. Even without using the scripture of light body, he could avoid it just by moving his upper body slightly, and he could perceive every single trajectory. Swish! Slash! Since the flow of the technique was visible, he naturally knew where to attack. Li Guang, who had leaned his head back, thrust his fist into Gyeong Sao's left shoulder with a lightning-fast strike. Thud. Kook. Gyeong Sao's body twisted in an instant as he was hit in the shoulder. Not missing that moment, Li Guang tried to stab his sharpened nails into his chest. In response, Gyeong Sao spewed out green poison from his mouth, even with his body twisted. Pooh! Splat! Li Guang hurriedly waved his hand and distanced himself from the spewed green poison. However, due to the close proximity, the poison touched his arm and some parts of his body. Sizzle sizzle sizzle. The parts of his clothing touched by the poison were directly corroded. Moreover, not only the touched parts but also the poison spread, causing most of his upper garment to melt away in an instant, showing how virulent the poison was. With such virulent poison, it was expected to penetrate his body, but sizzle sizzle sizzle. The poison gave the feeling of the scales on his skin being burned, but they quickly recovered, and instead, the ominous energy surging from within his body pushed it out. The rising green haze was proof of that. Ha ha ha. Li Guang burst into mad laughter, unable to hide his joy. Although he didn't know what it was, this energy different from internal energy and his transformed body made even poison ineffective, causing his confidence to rise sharply. It's the best. Grip. The ominous energy filling his body was overwhelming his existing internal energy. No, it was incomparable. With this power, it felt like he could do anything. Even if it was the 6th heaven, known as the Great Sage Realm, he felt that he could sufficiently challenge it now. But foolish acts are forbidden. Li Guang quickly regained his composure. Although this explosively surging power was tremendous, untrained power was hard to consider completely his own. Therefore, rather than recklessly charging at Mok Jiangun with false bravado just because he gained power, it was better to kill that old man Gaiong Sao and bide his time for the future. Whoosh! Li Guang, who had made his decision, launched his body to kill Gaiong Sao. If he killed him, he could prevent the information from leaking out. In an instant, Li Guang's figure reached right in front of Gaiong Sao, who was using lightness skill to distance himself. Li Guang tried to slash at Gaiong Sao with a strike infused with ominous energy. Die, old. Right at that moment. Swish. A blurry shadow blocked the way. Smack. It kicked his arm that was about to strike upward. Along with it, it spun its body and unleashed consecutive kicks, bam bam. They flew accurately towards his face. However, in a split second, Li Guang hurriedly raised his left wrist to block them. Whoosh! Even though he blocked them accurately, Li Guang's body was pushed back nearly 10 steps. The wrist that blocked the kicks ached and throbbed. However, it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't endure it. Swish! Li Guang lowered his hand and sarcastically raised the corners of his mouth, saying to Mok Jiangun, "It's not as threatening as before." "What is? That kick just now?" "Yeah. Strangely, I no longer fear you. It means the power gap isn't as wide as before." "Is that so? You're adapting to the demonic energy faster than I thought." "Demonic energy?" "I'm referring to that power of yours." At Mok Jiangun's words, Li Guang couldn't hide his puzzlement. Despite his power increasing sharply, Mok Jiangun still remained composed. He even seemed to know what this power given by that person was. Who the hell was this bastard? Phew. Li Guang let out a small sigh. Let's discard useless worries. Even if the power has become similar, unlike the bastard, he was still in the adaptation stage. There was nothing more foolish than being drunk on power and recklessly charging at the bastard, thinking he had gained the qualifications to compete with him. Right now, there was only one goal. Gaiong Sao. He just needed to kill that old man. Even if he couldn't target the Holy Fire Priestess immediately, that old man could become quite troublesome if he blurted out everything he knew about the organization. So Li Guang racked his brain. Let's pretend to target his comrades and the Holy Fire Priestess, and then kill that old man Gaiong Sao. Unlike when he saw them before, they seemed to have a pretty strong bond. Then, no matter how cold-hearted the bastard was, if his comrades were in danger, he would have no choice but to take his attention off the old man Gaiong Sao, even for a moment, to save them. First. Whoosh! Li Guang extended his sword fingers towards Mok Jiangun. Then, a gray exploding sword energy formed from his hand, made of demonic energy, and rushed towards Gaiong Sao with a fierce momentum. Swoosh! You're being a nuisance. Clang! In response, Mok Jiangun quickly blocked it and deflected it using the profound principle of the scripture of transferring true qi. Of course, even before that, Li Guang had twisted his body and launched himself towards Mok Jiangun's companions who were fighting against some of the remaining masked individuals. They were quite skilled, but with his current self, it seemed possible to take care of one or two of them and take a hostage before Mok Jiangun could catch up to him. Swish swish swish. In the eyes of Li Guang, who was moving at an extremely high speed, the sight of the masked individuals and Mok Jiangun's subordinates fighting slowed down significantly. It was as if the flow of time was different for each of them. But right at that moment. Swish! A black line appeared in the void in front of him, and something blurrily landed 10 steps ahead. It was none other than Sickle-slaying demon? The bastard. Li Guang's eyes trembled. Thanks to this ominous power, the speed at which he was moving had doubled compared to before. But how did the bastard get ahead of him? Moreover, he could see that the bastard's right hand was holding the evil commandment sword, but in his left hand. Li Guang's eyes gradually widened. If his eyes weren't deceiving him, that was clearly a severed arm. Due to the intense vibration of the severed arm held in Mok Jaeongun's left hand while he was in the flow of high-speed movement, it was difficult to discern whose arm it was. Right at that moment. Slice. With a feeling of something leaving his body, a burning pain struck his right wrist. Along with it, as Li Guang, who had been running with lightness skill, lost his balance, swoosh. His body soared into the air due to the airflow formed by the sharp sword energy. Ugh. Swish 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 swish. As his soaring body rose into the air, the sharp sword energy shredded his entire body. He had been convinced that his body had become close to indestructible, with scales appearing and even poison being ineffective. Yet, he could clearly feel the scales being sliced. And he could also tell that his entire body was drenched in blood in an instant. Thud. Splash. Eventually, Li Guang fell to the ground. Lying on the ground, Li Guang's expression became dazed. This? What in the world? Judging from the lack of sensation in his right arm, it seemed that it was indeed his arm. The searing pain from the sword energy slicing his entire body made his mind hazy. Swish swish swish. Splash. Splash. Then, the sound of footsteps crossing the rainwater-soaked ground could be heard. Li Guang struggled to raise his head. Mok Jaeongun's appearance, emitting a ferocious black haze from his entire body as if he had become one with the darkness, truly resembled a demon. Li Guang couldn't understand at all. He was certain that there was no longer a significant difference in martial power after exchanging a couple of moves with him. But what was this now? How? To the perplexed Li Guang, Mok Jaeongun spoke, "Why are you surprised? I clearly told you earlier that I had used only 3-star power." 3-star power? Li Guang was momentarily dumbfounded. So did that mean he had only faced him with about 30% of his full power during their earlier exchange? Chapter 314. Half Human, Half Monster. Part 3. 3-star power. The power Mok Jaeongun had used was a mere 30% of his full strength. Of course, this was when he only used the energy of death. If he were enveloped in demonic energy like now, it could be said to be doubled instead. Li Guang spoke with difficulty, his expression perplexed. "Why you deceived me?" At that question, the corners of Mok Jaeongun's mouth reached his ears. "You're very perceptive." Shudder. Li Guang shuddered at the answer that didn't deny it. Mok Jaeongun facing him with only 3-star power wasn't to conserve his strength or for exploration. It was simply to pay him back for what had happened in the past. "You endured my 3-star power." He still remembered those words clearly. Of course, he wanted to continue this petty retribution, but it became difficult after Li Guang became one with that black sword filled with the Amugi's demonic energy. So, without wasting unnecessary time, he decisively used his full power to subdue him in one fell swoop. Splash. Mok Jaeongun tossed Li Guang's severed arm as if it were a nuisance. Then, approaching closer, he said, "It must have been your secret weapon, but it's a pity it didn't work. For you, of course. You must have wanted to surprise me with your rapidly increasing power, right?" Nash. Was this bastard mocking him now? Li Guang was enraged, but he had nothing to say in the face of such overwhelming power. What was this bastard's true identity? The strike that exploded earlier when his power was concentrated into one could be said to have reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship without exaggeration. Was this really the same bastard who didn't even know the M of martial arts half a year ago? Flinch flinch. He wanted to move his body, but he couldn't. All the muscles and tendons in his body had been cut, making it impossible to move. Strange. When he was touched by the virulent poison energy of Gyeong Sao, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan and the 8 poison sect leader, he felt his body push it out and recover. However, that ferocious and dark energy emanating from the bastard was scattering the energy within his body. Was that why the severed muscles and tendons weren't recovering? Is this the end? With his right arm severed and all his muscles and tendons cut, leaving him unable to move, there was no difference from a martial artist meeting his death. Li Guang was dazed with a sense of futility. Mok Jiangan approached him and said, "Are you ready to answer my questions now?" At that question, Li Guang snorted and said, "You've made me almost a cripple, and you expect something to come out of my mouth? Just kill me." Now that his life as a martial artist had ended, he had no attachment to life. And he had his pride. That old man Gaiang Sao might have begged for his life, wanting to live until he became senile, but Li Guang was different. "You seem to have quite a bit of integrity. Stop spouting nonsense and kill me. Old man Gaiang Sao, you will soon face punishment from that person. Look forward to it." At Li Guang's warning, which sounded like a curse, Gaiang Sao's complexion darkened. Although he had submitted to that monster-like bastard to avoid the immediate crisis, he couldn't help but fear the aftermath from the organization. Should I run away? Gaiang Sao was inwardly conflicted. However, after witnessing Mok Jiangan's tremendous sword strike earlier, he lacked the confidence to escape. This bastard was a monster who could kill him at any time if he wanted to. As Gaiang Sao's mind became complicated, Mok Jiangan spoke up. "Let me make a proposal. Stop the bullshit and kill. Although the regeneration from the demonic energy won't work due to the demonic energy, if you answer my questions, I'll dispel the demonic energy for you." What? Right now, your body has become closer to a demon or spirit than human. If the demonic energy is dispelled, it seems like it will recover on its own. At Mok Jiangan's words, Li Guang's eyes trembled faintly. His body could recover? He had thought he was no different from a vegetable, lying there with all his muscles and tendons severed. To the wavering Li Guang, Mok Jiangan pointed to the severed arm with his eyes and said, "The arm might reattach too, you know? My arm can be reattached? It seems possible with your regenerative ability, but if it doesn't work, I can personally attach it for you. I've done it a few times, so it's not that difficult. Of course, the longer the delay, the harder it becomes." At Mok Jiangan's words, Li Guang's tongue became parched. If there was an opportunity to recover his severed arm and severed muscles and tendons, it naturally meant he could make a comeback. However, accepting this proposal meant submitting to the bastard and betraying the organization. That old man Gaiang Sao didn't realize it. The extent of the organization's power. If that person wanted to, the Gaiang clan could be exterminated overnight. Even if Gaiang Sao was an expert comparable to the 8 stars, it wouldn't matter. Tremble, tremble, tremble. Li Guang's body trembled. After countless contemplations in an instant, he finally reached a difficult conclusion. Kill me. He chose to maintain his integrity. Even if he could save his life at the moment, it was better to keep his oath of loyalty to the end than to be chased by the organization and meet his death. To him, Mok Jiangan smiled and said, "It seems that no matter what proposal I make, you won't answer my questions. Stop spouting nonsense and kill me. If you don't want to repeat the mistake I made, it's best to slice this neck cleanly." Yes, of course, I should. But on second thought, it seems I need to be more flexible. No matter what you say, it's useless. Kill. How about I join your side? What? Li Guang's expression froze for a moment. What was this bastard talking about now? Earlier, I noticed you were trying to persuade me, right? Seeing that, it seems you need some manpower. You. Are you serious? What was his ulterior motive? Li Guang showed a disbelieving expression. Then, Chang Ryang's voice reached Mok Jiangan's ears. Mortal. What are you trying to do? What do you mean, what am I trying to do? Saying you'll join their side, what nonsense is that? At her question, Mok Jiangan smiled without answering. Then, he reached out his hand and sucked in Li Guang's severed right arm, which he had dropped on the ground, using void absorption. Grab. Holding the severed arm, Mok Jiangan approached Li Guang. Unable to move, Li Guang could only flinch and show wariness. Then, Mok Jiangan brought Li Guang's arm to the severed part. Mok Jiangan placed his palm on the severed part. Then, the residual demonic energy remaining at the severed part was sucked into Mok Jiangun's hand. As soon as that happened, the blood vessels at the severed part wriggled and squirmed. Whoosh! Eventually, the severed surfaces of the arm began to reattach to each other. Even the eyes of Li Guang, the person involved, couldn't help but be filled with amazement at this astonishing sight. As the arm was being reattached, Mok Jiangun placed his palm on Li Guang's chest. SSSSHHH. Through his palm, the demonic energy that had penetrated Li Guang's shredded upper body like poison gradually dissipated and disappeared. Then, breathing became more comfortable, and the wounds rapidly healed. At this, Gaiang Sao looked at him with an uncomprehending gaze. What the hell is he doing? From Gaiang Sao's perspective, it was very perplexing. He had submitted, even risking betraying the organization, out of fear of losing his arm and his life. But if Li Guang maintained his integrity, why wasn't Mok Jiangun even considering torturing him to extract the information he wanted and instead restoring his body? Sigh. He was in a proper dilemma. What was he supposed to do now that he had submitted? As he was at a loss for what to do. There. Now, if we just dispel the demonic energy in your lower body, you'll be completely recovered. At Mok Jiangun's words, Li Guang looked at him with a suspicious gaze and said, "Are you giving me a carrot to deceive me now?" "No. As I said, I'm exercising some flexibility." Flexibility? Yes. I've had conversations with people from your organization several times, but I couldn't obtain anything proper. I don't know if it's the same for your side, but every single one of them. Tap tap. Mok Jiangun tapped his head with his finger and said, "Has a seal." Seal? Li Guang's eyes turned cold. Among the members of the organization, there were those who belonged to the second realm but were unaware of this truth, but Li Guang, who had been loyal to that person for 2 or 3 generations, knew about the seal. He himself was probably sealed as well. If he tried to say something important, his head might explode with a pop. So, aside from knowing that there are ranks like the emblem, the first realm, and the second realm, there was no way to find out anything else. But the thing is, I don't really need such information. What the hell are you after? It's nothing much. Actually, if you just provide what I want, I don't think I need to have a major confrontation with your organization. What you want? Yes. To be honest, I have no interest in who the leader of your organization is or what they're trying to do. You have no interest? Yes. I don't care what they do. Even if your organization kills all the people in the Central Plains. At Mok Jiangun's words, Li Guang's eyes wavered. If the hypocrites of the righteous faction or others said such a thing, it wouldn't have had much impact. But this bastard was definitely not a benevolent type of person. Rather, he was close to being evil itself, enough to be called the sickle-slaying demon. He might be the talent that person wants. An existence that could carry out slaughter without question if an order was given. Moreover, this bastard's martial prowess had reached the 6th heaven, which could be considered the great sage realm. If he were an enemy, he would be an existence that must be killed, but as an ally, such a monstrous talent would certainly be a great asset. Glance. Li Guang then glanced at Gaiang Sao. Meeting his eyes, Gaiang Sao unconsciously swallowed his dry saliva with a tense gaze. Seeing that, Li Guang snorted. Right. That cunning old man didn't even compare to the value of this bastard. No, could they even be compared? Right. That person would also prefer this monster-like brat over that old man who betrayed the organization to save his own life. Rather, he might be valued even more for bringing such an exceptional talent. Once his mind was somewhat organized, Li Guang spoke in a slightly softened tone. Are you certain? That if we give you what you want, you'll join the organization? Yes. I told you, right? The reason I've been tracking your organization until now was for that purpose. I don't know what you want, but if it's an exceptional talent like you, not that traitorous old man, that person would want to bring you in, even if it means giving you a substantial reward. At Li Guang's words, Gaiang Sao's expression gradually turned pale. Even if things got twisted, how could it turn out like this? Chapter 315. Half Human, Half Monster. Part 4. I don't know what you want, but if it's an exceptional talent like you, not that traitorous old man, that person would want to bring you in, even if it means giving you a substantial reward. At the scarred middle-aged man Li Guang's words, the expression of Guyang Sao, the patriarch of the Guyang clan, hardened. This was a situation he had never anticipated. He had barely submitted, disregarding the organization's aftermath and his reputation, all to save his life at the moment, but that monster-like bastard said he would join the organization. It was maddening. If no one else had been present, it might have been different, but since this happened in front of Li Guang, a senior member of the Second Realm, he couldn't take back the words he had uttered. What should I do about this? If Li Guang attacked him together with that bastard, there would be no chance to do anything. No, in the first place, that monster-like bastard alone could kill him. Guyang Sao's mind became complicated. With his arm broken, his primordial energy was also damaged, making it difficult to even run away. Damn it. It was truly a desperate situation where he didn't know what to do. Then, his eyes met Li Guang's. That fellow, who still couldn't move his lower body, looked at him with a meaningful gaze and raised the corners of his mouth, then said to Mok Jiangun, sickle-slaying demon. Since you said you'd join the organization, can you do one thing for the organization? You're already making demands before I even receive what I want. It won't be a difficult task for you. And if you become one of us, it's something you must do. What is it? Executing a traitor. Traitor? Ah. Li Guang stared at Guyang Sao, revealing his murderous intent. Seeing this, Guyang Sao, who had been racking his brain on what to do, hurriedly shouted at Mok Jiangun, "Hey, you! Even though I submitted to you, I did it well prepared for the organization's aftermath. But now, if you come after me, isn't that going too far?" As soon as he finished speaking, Li Guang pressed. Going too far? You old fox. How thick-skinned are you to utter such words? What? You betrayed the organization that invited and treated you well, and you have the audacity to say it proudly. TSK, this is all your just desserts. Treatment? Huh. At his sarcasm, Guyang Sao showed a reaction as if he found it ridiculous. He wanted to say something but eventually closed his mouth. Right now, the issue was how that monster would respond. Then, so you're asking me to kill him? There are already many tasks to do even though I haven't officially joined yet. Please understand. Strictly speaking, you bear some responsibility for that person betraying the organization, don't you? I suppose so. I will definitely inform that person of your merit. So right now. Before he could even finish his sentence. Whoosh. As if he had no other choice, Guyang Sao kicked the ground and used lightness skill to rush in the opposite direction from where they were. As Guyang Sao suddenly ran away, Li Guang shouted, "We must catch that traitorous old man." At his resounding cry, two of the few remaining masked individuals hurriedly launched themselves in the direction of Guyang Sao. No. These fellows? He hadn't been talking to them, so it was perplexing that they went after him. No matter how much Guyang Sao had betrayed, he wasn't someone those lowly fellows could catch even if they chased after him. Could it be? For a moment, Li Guang clicked his tongue. Come to think of it, it didn't seem like they were really chasing after Guyang Sao to catch him. A considerable number of the masked individuals had lost their lives, and seeing himself lying on the ground covered in blood and Guyang Sao running away, anyone could tell the situation was unfavorable. They were using the pursuit of Guyang Sao as an excuse to naturally attempt an escape. So Li Guang shouted at Mok Jiangun, who was acting leisurely, sickle-slaying demon. If you let that old man go, the organization's existence will be exposed. If that happens, you might not be able to obtain what you want. Goodness. You're troublesome in many ways. Swish. In the end, Mok Jiangun moved. As his figure dispersed and disappeared, Li Guang gritted his teeth. If only his lower body had been intact, he would have personally chased after that traitorous bastard and sliced off his head. But he became inwardly anxious. If that sickle-slaying demon bastard caught Gyeong Sao, that old man, it would be fortunate, but if he deliberately let him go, that person might punish him with death. That bastard must catch him. Otherwise, it would truly become problematic. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Despite suffering an injury where his arm was twisted and the bone protruded, befitting his status as an expert of the transformation realm who had surpassed the wall, the 8 Poison sect leader Gyeong Sao was using lightness skill at a tremendous speed, cutting through the thicket. His speed was much faster than a horse running at full speed. Gyeong Sao ran with all his might, to the point where his surroundings were barely visible. He had never run so desperately even in his youth, but there was no other way to survive. Anyway, that Li Guang fellow can't even walk right now, so if I can just shake off that monster, a sliver of possibility would arise. While running like this, he used all the hidden weapons and even poisoned the path to hinder the pursuit as much as possible. But then, Gyeong Sao's expression suddenly hardened. He had only been paying attention to what was behind him. But in the direction he was using lightness skill, a figure appeared. Damn it! Gyeong Sao could instinctively be certain that it was Mok Jyeongun. Realizing it was no use, Gyeong Sao shot a powerful energy infused with poison energy towards that figure. Swoosh! Then he changed direction and headed east. It was just a temporary measure, but he had to try everything in this situation. Still, it was a powerful energy infused with the power of 10 stars and the 8 poisons, so he thought it would at least buy him some time, but, smack. At that moment, a blurry shadow appeared just 5 steps ahead of him. And that shadow quickly solidified. Oh no! It was none other than Mok Jyeongun. Gyeong Sao's face contorted as he clicked his tongue. No matter how much he had surpassed the wall, he didn't know the gap would be this wide. In the end, no matter what he did, he was no different from being in the palm of Buddha's hand. Eventually, Gyeong Sao stopped, unable to hide his sense of futility. Seeing his expression that seemed to have given up, Mok Jyeongun said, "Don't you have any intention to resist further? What resistance can I put up? Are you toying with me?" "Of course not." Mok Jyeongun shrugged his shoulders. Then Gyeong Sao made a disgusted expression and spoke in a choking voice, "Look here. I still have many attachments to life, so I surrendered while being prepared for the organization's aftermath. But this is really too much. Do you have to kill me to feel satisfied? It's unfortunate that you have attachments to life. I had no intention of killing you." "Right." It was Li Guang's request. So Gyeong Sao spoke in a pleading voice. "Then please, can't you let me go? No matter how much that Li Guang fellow made the request for the sake of the organization, isn't a man's word as heavy as 1,000 gold? How can you speak with a forked tongue?" "Well, depending on the situation, I might do that. If you're a gentleman, you should." "I'm not a gentleman, and I've never considered my words to be like gold." When even his desperate plea didn't work, Gyeong Sao was at a loss for words due to frustration and futility. It seemed like no words would get through to this bastard. At the very least, if he had a sense of righteousness, he should have released him or shown a bit of mercy, but that seemed difficult to expect. Is this the end? He had even thrown away his pride and begged for his life, but he didn't expect it to turn out like this. Even if he couldn't see the end through poison, there was just one thing he wanted to accomplish somehow. But it seemed impossible in this life. So, Gyeong Sao, having given up, plopped down on the ground, closed his eyes, and muttered, "In the end, I can't settle the match." "Match? What match? What's the point of telling you when you won't spare my life even if I do?" Gyeong Sao didn't want to become any more pitiful. He had already thrown away his pride as much as he could, and there was no need to try to look good in front of someone who wouldn't spare his life anyway. To him, Mok Jyeongun chuckled and said, "Who knows? I don't have the discerning eye, so who can say if my heart will be moved? You're already trying to break the agreement you made once, so how can I trust you? If you put it that way, you betraying the organization's trust to save your life is no different, so how can I trust you? That's... At this, Gyeong Sao tried to say something but eventually closed his mouth. Even if he had his own reasons, it was meaningless if the other person couldn't accept them. No, you're right. Even if my life was hanging by a thread, I easily submitted and said I would reveal information, so I'm the one who can't be trusted. Then it's fortunate. This bastard's words are subtly biting. It was inwardly unpleasant, but since it couldn't be resolved by force, he endured it. Then Mok Jae-eun said, "But I am curious. If you could easily betray them to the point of disregarding the aftermath just to save your life, why did you follow that organization? What are you trying to do by hearing that?" To that question, Mok Jae-eun smiled and replied, "To decide whether to kill you or not. To decide whether to kill me or not. Aren't you taking my life too lightly, even if you're capable?" Gyeong Sao frowned and showed his defiance. Then Mok Jae-eun folded his arms and said with an indifferent gaze, "Do you think I'm merely discussing the weight of a life? It's better to keep in mind who holds the authority over life and death." Shudder. It was truly strange. He didn't particularly reveal his energy. Yet there was a sharp sensation around his neck. Startled by this, Gyeong Sao unconsciously swallowed his dry saliva. Even though this fellow was clearly younger than half, no, 1/3 of his life, how did he possess this level of weight and pressure? As he was puzzled, Gyeong Sao soon seemed to understand the reason. The caliber of a leader? This bastard was born with the caliber of a ruler. Regardless of age, those with the caliber of a ruler embrace others as a leader or a dominant figure and guide everyone on the path they have created. Gyeong Sao inwardly exclaimed in admiration. It seemed that his intimidation by this fellow wasn't simply because of power. As he was inwardly marveling, Mok Jae-eun said, "Does your silence mean you're choosing death?" At those words, Gyeong Sao hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth. It might sound like an excuse if I say this now, but it was to repay a debt. Debt? That's right. What kind of debt? My granddaughter was afflicted with an almost incurable disease. Thanks to a medicinal herb called creeping rockfoil that they helped me obtain, she was barely able to prolong her life. Creeping rockfoil? Isn't that a rare herb that grows in extremely cold, snowy regions? This fellow? Gyeong Sao couldn't hide his surprise at Mok Jae-eun's knowledge of medicinal materials. Creeping rockfoil was a special medicinal ingredient that not only the medicinal merchants and physicians in the Central Plains but also those in the western regions, where the Gyeong clan's estate was located, hardly knew about. Even he had barely found out about it while trying to treat his granddaughter's illness. But to think this fellow knew about creeping rockfoil, his knowledge of medicinal materials was no ordinary. Just who was this bastard? Then, Mok Jae-eun stroked his chin and said, "Anyway, you're saying that you worked with them in exchange for your granddaughter's life because of the hard-to-obtain creeping rockfoil." That's right. I had no choice. Creeping rockfoil was a medicinal herb that was difficult to grow naturally in both the western regions and the Central Plains, and even I had been searching for it for a long time but couldn't find it, so I desperately needed their help. It's the life of your flesh and blood, so of course, you would. But then, all the more reason you shouldn't have betrayed them, right? Yes, you're right about that. But I have sufficiently repaid my debt to them. I worked for them for nearly 10 years and was dragged around too much with creeping rockfoil as a hostage. At those words, Mok Jae-eun asked with a puzzled look, "Wasn't creeping rockfoil used only once?" It wasn't just once, but she had to take it regularly and consistently. I don't know where they obtained creeping rockfoil from, but they always supplied a certain amount, and that's why I had no choice but to help them, even if it was to pay the price. There was a subtle sense of disillusionment in Gyeong Sao's voice as he spoke. His granddaughter's life was practically held hostage, so he had no choice but to work with the organization, but most of the things they did were not to his liking. Moreover, when countless civilians, not just martial artists, lost their lives due to the poison he created, his desire to cut ties with them grew even stronger. Seeing him like this, Mok Jayangan said with twitching lips, "In the end, you chose your own life over your granddaughter's." At those words, Guyang Sao raised his voice, flaring up, "What do you take me for? Even if I was dragged around by them, I take pride in being one of the top 3 in terms of medicinal knowledge in both the Central Plains and the Western regions. Oh, could it be that you found a solution to replace creeping rock foil? You're really quick-witted." Guyang Sao clicked his tongue and nodded. "You're right. For 10 years, I analyzed the remaining creeping rock foil and created a medicinal material that could replace it. You were gradually preparing to cut ties with them." "That's right. In fact, although it got twisted because of you, I was going to settle things with that bastard Tang In-hei after this job and retire with my family." "The settlement you're referring to is with the Thousand Poisons hand, Tang In-hei. I've been competing with that fellow for a long time but could never settle it. That has always remained a lingering attachment." The 8 Poison sect leader Guyang Sao and the Thousand Poisons hand Tang In-hei were widely recognized as rivals by anyone in the Central Plains. And they, too, had always been conscious of each other and competed. Seeing Guyang Sao's pure lingering attachment, Mok Jayangan's eyes turned strange. "Why don't you agree with it?" Chong Ryang asked Mok Jayangan. At this, Mok Jayangan shrugged and replied, "Who knows? You may not understand, but having a rival to compete with for a lifetime is something to envy." "Is that so?" "Of course. Even I have someone like that." "No. What are you going to do? Sparing his life or not is up to you, mortal, but you need to consider the impact it will have later." "I should." Then Guyang Sao, looking refreshed as if getting the secret off his chest had relieved him, opened his mouth. "So what will you do with me?" To his question, Mok Jayangan stroked his chin and replied, It's definitely a waste to just kill you." At those words, Guyang Sao's face brightened. "Then will you let me go as agreed?" "That's not difficult, but if I let you go, it will be hard for you to have the settlement you want while running away, and your family will also be in danger. Are you okay with that?" At this question, Guyang Sao's expression suddenly hardened. Certainly, he could save his life for now, but the organization would try to eliminate him somehow, and they would target his family members who hadn't escaped yet to find him. If things had proceeded according to the original plan, he could have quietly disappeared, but now it was thoroughly entangled. What should he do about this? Faced with the complicated situation, Guyang Sao sighed with frustration. "Sigh." To him, Mok Jayangan said. "But there's not necessarily no way out." "Are you saying there's a way?" "Yes. Because if you just die, it will be resolved." "What?" Guyang Sao was dumbfounded by Mok Jayangan's answer. He talked as if there was some solution, but in the end, he was saying that it would be resolved if he died. What the hell did that mean? To the perplexed Guyang Sao, Mok Jayangan said with a sarcastic smile, "It's quite painful, but you can endure the pain of having your skin peeled off, right?" Swoosh. The rain had weakened a bit, but it was still pouring down. Li Guang, a member of the Second Realm, looked in the direction where Guyang Sao, the patriarch of the Guyang clan, had fled with a somewhat impatient expression. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't understand. That old man was almost like having his granddaughter held hostage, making it difficult for him to betray the organization. Of course, he could submit since it was a matter of his own life, but the Guyang Sao he had observed wasn't such a small-minded person. Why did he struggle so desperately to live? He even ran away. Just as he was thinking that, someone emerged from the bushes. Splash! Splash! Walking through the pooled rainwater was none other than Mok Jayangan. As Mok Jayangan appeared, Li Guang's gaze naturally turned to something, which was what he was holding in his right hand. Seeing it, the corners of Li Guang's mouth rose. As expected. As expected. As expected. The reason for his reaction was simple. What Mok Jayangan was holding in his hand was none other than Guyang Sao's severed head. The sight of his tongue hanging out and his dead appearance was horrifying beyond words. This bastard is really something. He had anticipated a situation where Mok Jae-un might let him go or release him. But he had brought the head, cleanly cutting it off. Having reached the level of a great sage, he had easily caught up and executed the traitor despite taking it easy. That's fine. With this much, that person would also be satisfied despite losing Gyeong Sao, because he had gained an even more outstanding talent. Is this enough? Thud. Splash. Mok Jae-un threw Gyeong Sao's head close to Li Guang. Despite his tongue sticking out, his expressionless face, as if he didn't even know he was dead, made Li Guang inwardly gasp in admiration. He still couldn't understand this pace of advancement, but it was truly remarkable. Considering that even an expert of the transformation realm was dealt with like this. Good work. The leader of the organization, that person, will also praise your merit. I don't need praise. I just hope to receive what I want. Don't worry. As long as it doesn't interfere with that person's doubts or the organization's work, he will unconditionally grant it, just as you said. I would be grateful if he does. Of course, it's natural. Then I guess this is no longer necessary. With those words, Mok Jae-un walked over and then squish. What are you? Before he could even say anything to stop him, Mok Jae-un crushed Gyeong Sao's head with his foot. This sight left Li Guang speechless. Of course, he had directly confirmed it with his own eyes, but he had intended to take the head and have it verified. But now that it was crushed, that was no longer possible. Dumbfounded by Mok Jae-un's hasty action, Li Guang clicked his tongue inwardly. Huh. If he were just a subordinate, it would have been a matter to reprimand him, but this fellow had monstrous potential, reaching the level of a great sage despite not even being of age. He would undoubtedly be valued by that person. They had already started on bad terms, so there was no point in scolding him over this matter and making things awkward between them. Is there a problem? No. Seeing him give up without saying a word, Mok Jae-un's lips twitched. He had anticipated that Li Guang would react this way to some extent. With this, Gyeong Sao became a dead man to them, and there was no way to confirm his corpse or anything else. The image of Gyeong Sao's shocked face flashed in Mok Jae-un's mind. Gyeong Sao asked, startled. Why, you're going to peel off my face? Yes. Are you serious? Yes. It might be a bit painful, but if you can't sacrifice one face to break ties with them, isn't it a cheap price to pay? No, how the hell are you going to deceive that Li Guang fellow with just the face skin? Unless you cut off my head, he absolutely won't believe it. I just so happen to have something useful. Saying that, Mok Jae-un brought something that was lying far away. It was the severed head of a dead masked man. While chasing after Gyeong Sao, he had discovered two masked men running away and had beheaded them both in an instant. What are you going to do with that? I'm going to put your face on this head. Hearing this, Gyeong Sao couldn't hide his astonishment. No way. You know how to make human skin masks too? Yes. It's not that difficult. Especially if I peel off the face of a living person, it's even easier. At these words, Gyeong Sao was at a loss for words, clicking his tongue. Just how far did this fellow's abilities go? Although he was terrified at the mention of peeling off his face, in the end, Gyeong Sao realized that this was the only way to break free from them, so he accepted Mok Jae-un's proposal. Of course, there was a small price to pay for this proposal as well. As a result, since Li Guang was deceived, the plan could be considered successfully concluded. Then Li Guang cautiously spoke up. By the way, since we're practically family now, can you dispel the energy in my lower body? Li Guang gestured towards his lower body with his eyes. While Mok Jae-un had gone to catch Gyeong Sao, he had tried to dispel the energy that kept penetrating his lower body. However, although he could release some of the energy, he couldn't completely dispel it, so his muscles and tendons still hadn't recovered. Is there anything difficult about that? But before that, can you first provide me with information about the person I want? At Mok Jae-un's words, Li Guang furrowed his brows. What was he doing, trying to bargain with his lower body after saying he would join the organization? A hint of suspicion arose in Li Guang, and he said, "Do you not trust me?" "Not yet." Hearing those words, Li Guang's eyes narrowed. He had temporarily put aside his doubts, getting carried away by the thought that such an outstanding fellow joining as a talent would be praised by that person. But with the current conversation, his suspicions grew a bit more. If the fellow was pretending to join under false pretenses to obtain information, the worst-case scenario could unfold. So Li Guang cautiously opened his mouth. "I see. But it's the same for us. What if you kill me after hearing only the information you want?" I said I would exercise flexibility. How can I trust those words? I even killed the elder who used poison as he wished for you, yet you're being quite tiresome. It's going to become quite troublesome at this rate. With those words, Mok Jianan lightly exerted his pressure. Then Li Guang spoke with a somewhat pale face due to the pressure. "Then prove one more thing." "What more do you want me to prove, and how?" "Have your subordinates send away Holy Fire Priestess first. In return, since I need your help anyway, I'll stay here with you for 5 days." At his proposal, Mok Jianan snorted inwardly. This fellow was also using his head more than he thought. Considering that he was trying to achieve what he wanted while preparing for any contingencies. Li Guang stared intently at Mok Jianan. If he couldn't readily accept this proposal, then the fellow's claim of joining their organization was a blatant lie. How will he respond? As he observed the reaction. "Well, if that proves it, let's do that." Mok Jianan shrugged his shoulders and readily accepted it without any fuss. This made Li Guang inwardly puzzled. Was it just my misunderstanding? Had he been too suspicious? The fellow kept agreeing to his demands without question. Moreover, should I send her away right now? Mok Jianan dispelled the true energy surrounding him and gestured while shouting, "Please bring the elder here." At Mok Jianan's command, the subordinates guarding the vicinity of the residence were puzzled, but soon Sib Chun brought Holy Fire Priestess closer. However, something happened here that piqued Mok Jianan's interest. Upon discovering Li Guang, Holy Fire Priestess's complexion darkened with a stiff face, as if she knew him. Likewise, Li Guang seemed to know her as well. Holy Fire Priestess. It's been a long time. Holy Fire Priestess averted her gaze and remained silent. Seeing her reaction, Li Guang chuckled and gestured to summon the surviving masked individuals. As they approached, Li Guang said to her, "Where is the prophecy?" At that question, Holy Fire Priestess clenched her mouth even tighter. Then Li Guang shook his head and spoke in a low voice. "I guess you couldn't find Guardian Zhang, no, that old man Mun no?" As soon as those words ended, Mok Jianan's eyes sharpened. Mun, no? That was his grandfather's name. Chapter 316. Half Human, Half Monster. Part 5. I guess you couldn't find Guardian Zhang, no, that old man Mun no? At Li Guang's words, the complexion of Holy Fire Priestess, who had been keeping her mouth firmly shut, darkened. Seeing her reaction, Li Guang's eyes sparkled. As expected. Finally, there's a reaction. It's a lie. You're just trying to test me with some scheme, aren't you? The Holy Fire Priestess opened her mouth without meeting his eyes. Then Li Guang snorted and said, "A scheme? What would we gain by scheming with such a thing? Even with the power of the Holy Fire." She didn't finish her sentence. At her words, Li Guang let out a hollow laugh and said, "So it was true. Even with the power of that great Holy Fire, you couldn't find that old man. Mun no. Or have you really lost the power of prophecy?" At those words, the Holy Fire Priestess trembled her cheeks without giving any answer. Seeing this reaction, Li Guang furrowed his brows with an intrigued gaze. "Don't tell me, that rumor was really true?" Li Guang spoke as if surprised. Although most of the high-ranking members didn't know, he had been assigned to deal with the Fire Faith Order before, so he knew well where her power originated from. Holy Fire. It was a sacred orb called the Holy Fire. She seemed to receive prophecies or revelations through that orb. Therefore, he knew that if it fell from her hands, she would no longer receive prophecies or revelations. But this was unexpected news. The orb might not be the problem. Was that person's prediction true? If that's the case, this old woman would have no value whatsoever. Of course, since she was the spiritual pillar of the Fire Faith Order and the leader who guided the believers along with the sect master, she could be used in a different way, but there was absolutely no need for them to make such sacrifices. Well, you're quite something. Even though you really lost that power, you kept it hidden until now. Nonsense. The power of the holy fire is not as simple as you think. Don't beat around the bush. Then prove that you haven't lost your power. It's a good thing. You don't even need to report it to that person. Just tell me. Where is the orb? You need the orb to find what that old man Munno stole, don't you? Even if it's not us, the Fire Faith Order will also try to find it. You're going to keep your mouth shut until the end? Huh. Fine. Smack. As soon as he finished speaking, Li Guang pushed his palms towards the ground. Then his body floated up and flew towards Holy Fire Priestess. Even though the muscles and tendons in his lower body had not yet recovered, he was still a pinnacle stage expert of the transformation realm who had surpassed the wall, and thanks to the demonic energy of the Imugi, his close-range movement was completely free. Gasp! The Holy Fire Priestess was startled and tried to dodge him. His appearance, with his entire skin transformed like a snake's scales, was closer to a monster than a human, so she couldn't help but be terrified. Whoosh 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 smack. But Li Guang, who had hit the ground with his palms a few times, grabbed her in an instant. Thud. Splash. Ah. Li Guang straddled Holy Fire Priestess's back as she fell to the ground, grabbed her neck, and said, "Grip. I'll make you confess directly before taking you to that person. I'll let go. If I were to let you go easily, why would I do this? Now, I'm going to break your fingers one by one. Of course, that's just the beginning. Once I'm done breaking your fingers, I'll pull out your nails one by one. And if you still keep your mouth shut, I'll cut off your fingers one by one." Gnash. At Li Guang's threat, the Holy Fire Priestess gritted her teeth. It was scary and terrifying, but she was someone who had kept her mouth shut until the end despite the torture and threats at the Imperial Palace. Even if the torture Li Guang was about to inflict was more severe than that, she had no intention of yielding. What the hell is going on? Siap Chen couldn't understand this situation at all. He didn't know the identities of these people, so why was his lord suddenly cooperating with them? The Holy Fire Priestess was an important person the society leader had told him to bring. He couldn't just leave her to get hurt. So Siap Chen tried to step in. Yo dash. Just leave it be for now. But he had to stop due to Mok Jiangun's telepathic message. Siap Chen looked at Mok Jiangun in puzzlement, turning his head to ask for the reason, but, shudder. The moment he saw Mok Jiangun's face, he couldn't say a word. He had never seen such a cold expression without a hint of a smile. Then, crack. Ah! Along with the sound of fingers being broken, a scream burst from Holy Fire Priestess's mouth. Speak. Ugh. Where is the orb? Ugh. The Holy Fire Priestess groaned and then bit her lip hard. Seeing her reaction, Li Guang snorted and then bent her middle finger backward. Crack. The finger was completely bent backward and broken. Seeing this, Li Guang grinned and asked again, "Where's the orb?" Crack. Ugh. Another one of her fingers was broken again. Unlike before, Holy Fire Priestess bit her lip so hard that blood flowed from it, enduring the pain. Seeing the remarkable endurance of the old woman, Li Guang clicked his tongue and said, "You're quite something, but do you think you can keep enduring? Fine. Let's see who wins. This time, I'll break 2 fingers at a time." Before he could even finish his sentence, Jiangun. Holy Fire Priestess, who had been enduring the pain, called out to Mok Jiangun. At her cry, Li Guang couldn't hide his puzzlement. Was she referring to the sickle-slaying demon as Mok Jiang'an? Jiang'an! Help me! The holy fire priestess rolled her eyes and asked for help from Mok Jiang'an, who was just watching her. He was a disciple of the Shadow Clan master of the Fire Faith Order, so he was a believer of the Fire Faith Order. Naturally, he had the duty to protect her, the holy fire priestess. But why wasn't he responding to her call? It was strange enough already. She couldn't understand why Mok Jiang'an, who was supposed to protect her, was just watching as this man threatened and intimidated her. She thought he might have some plan, but now it seemed that wasn't the case either. So she shouted, "Believer Jiang'an!" She had kept their relationship hidden for the sake of each other's safety, as the members of the Heaven and Earth Society with Mok Jiang'an seemed unaware of their identities. But if he was trying to betray her for some unknown reason, there was no reason to do so. "Believer Jiang'an?" At those words, Li Guang, who was straddling Holy Fire Priestess's back and pressing down on her neck, furrowed his brows and turned his head to look at Mok Jiang'an. "What the hell is this about? Believer Jiang'an?" To that question, Mok Jiang'an shrugged. Then he casually said, "I told a little lie to bring her along obediently when I took her out of the underground prison, so she has been regarding me as a fellow Fire Faith Order member all along." "Oh ho. I see. No wonder this stubborn old woman followed you meekly without being restrained. It seemed strange to me. What the hell?" The Holy Fire Priestess was dumbfounded. If she were to die here or be captured by their organization, the rebuilding of the Fire Faith Order would become even more impossible. But that bastard Mok Jiang'an was just watching, saying such things. Was it really a lie? But how did he know about the existence of the Shadow Clan master? Then did he also betray the Shadow Clan master? Her mind became confused, and all sorts of thoughts came to her. Then, grip. Thud. Splash. Li Guang turned her raised face to the side and slammed it into the ground. Then he whispered in her ear. "Too bad. Old woman. You must have had some hope, but... Ugh. Just give up now. You're too old to suffer like this. Don't you want to live out the rest of your life in peace? Truly stubborn. According to the prophecy, aren't you nothing but the root of evil that the Fire Faith Order must eliminate? But why did that old man Munno hide it without your knowledge? No matter how much I think about it, I don't understand." Squish. Li Guang pressed the Holy Fire Priestess's face even harder. Then she shouted in a pained voice. "I don't know. I know nothing." Still making excuses until the end. "Either you told that old man to hide it, or that old man betrayed you and the Fire Faith Order and hid it. It has to be one of the two, so why are you trying so hard to keep it a secret?" Squish. Tremble, tremble, tremble. As Li Guang pressed her face even harder, the Holy Fire Priestess trembled and spoke with difficulty. "Why are you so obsessed with the prophecy? Your leader is supposed to be an omniscient and omnipotent being, so why is he afraid of the prophecy?" Crack. Ah. Before she could even finish her sentence, Li Guang broke all her remaining fingers. Then Li Guang spoke with an angry face. "That person is not someone you can judge recklessly. That person fears nothing. Ah, kekook, keek keek." She suddenly started laughing like a madwoman. At her sudden, insane laughter, Li Guang frowned. Regardless, she continued to laugh and then opened her mouth. "Do you really think your leader is obsessed with it because he has no fear? What? You wench, really? No matter how great your leader is, in the end, he's just a parasite in a human body." Bam! Before she could finish her sentence, Li Guang slammed her face into the ground. He slammed it so hard that the rainwater pooled on the ground gradually turned red with blood. She seemed to have lost half her mind from the pain, her eyes unfocused. To her, Li Guang whispered in a voice filled with anger, "If you don't want to follow that old man Munno, don't you dare." Swoosh. What? Li Guang's expression soon hardened. An immense murderous intent was engulfing the surroundings, making him feel like he was about to lose consciousness. Thud. Thud. The masked individuals nearby collapsed to the ground, convulsing. It was no different for his allies. Ha, ha, my lord. Siep Chun also staggered back, gasping for breath from the unimaginable murderous intent. Murderous intent is said to be the materialized energy of murderous will. The murderous will engulfing the surroundings made everyone feel death while alive. That, wasn't it, earlier? Li Guang's eyes shook like crazy. If there was a god of death, could they emit such murderous intent? Right at that moment. Roar. Li Guang's body, which had been straddling the holy fire priestess's back, gradually floated into the air. Li Guang tried to resist by raising the demonic energy within his body, but it was meaningless from the start. His body was slowly being pulled towards the center of the storm of murderous intent. It was right in front of Mok Jiang'an. In Li Guang's crazily trembling eyes, Mok Jiang'an was not the being he had been looking at until just now. Shudder. Covered in black demonic energy and murderous intent, his appearance was the embodiment of fear, dread, and death itself. Seeing that, Li Guang, who was terrified for the first time in his life, stuttered and opened his mouth. Why are you doing this? He was very, very close. A sickle-slaying demon, I don't know why you're doing this, but, first, calm down. If there's some misunderstanding. The person who killed Munno. What? That's the person I was looking for,